Please welcome to the stage Gabriele Columbro, Executive Director of FinTech Open Source Foundation and General Manager of Linux Foundation Europe.
Hello. Hello, hello. Good morning. How are you feeling? Good. You actually showed up. That's great. I was wondering. I got stuck in traffic all morning. So, you guys hear me okay? Yeah. I'm going to get started. We have a packed agenda. Welcome to the 2023 9th edition of the Open Source in Finance Forum. New York. This is our yearly conference of FINOS, the FinTech Open Source Foundation, if you guys are not familiar with it. Before I get started, we got some housekeeping to do here. I'm having some echo, but hopefully it's good for you. First and foremost, I just want yourself to give yourself a round of applause. We passed 1,000 registrants today. This is about 50% more than last year. So thank you. We're very excited. Who knew actually banks would be able to collaborate in open source? On this note, a theme that you're going to keep hearing today is that contributions is not just about code. So please, I know financial guys are not the most vocal on socials, but help us by making noise. Here you see our social accounts, our hashtags. The more you spread the word, we're having 1,000 people today, the more the movement is going to grow. So thank you in advance for, if you enjoy the content, of course. And you can also trash talk, that's fine. Be vocal. On this note, be vocal, but be respectful and be kind. Here you have the Linux Foundation Code of Conduct. All of our events under FINOS and more broadly in the Linux Foundation are to be carried out under this Code of Conduct. You can look at the QR code. If you have any issues today, please find someone from the FINOS team or the Linux Foundation team. Go to the registration desk. We'll be able to help. And make sure, again, be vocal, but keep it make it a welcoming environment for everyone here. A little bit of housekeeping. You can get connected. You should have your password, as you can see it up here, OSSF 2023, and that's the password. Good. Before we get started, at the beginning of this conference, I always like to do a little bit of sort of trip down memory lane. This is our first open source in finance forum in 2017. 6 years ago, we had 9 since then. Two things that strike me in this picture. One, definitely we didn't have 1,000 people. Two, at that time, the conference was called the Open Source Strategy Forum. Our goal was really to make the industry aware as to why they should be using open source. And so it's interesting to see in this picture, people went on to be on stage. John Stecker, the CTO of Blackstone. We had Brad Levy, the CEO of Symphony. Frank Tersillo, the CTO at Standard & Poor's. Nitya, who runs the OSPO at Amazon. Gil at US Bank. So it's interesting to see how we had a lot of leaders in the industry that believed in this early. And I'm glad to see that now the conference has become, more broadly a gathering for developers and a gathering for technologists as sort of in recognition of the growth of our footprint in the industry. So a huge thank to our early supporters. Many of you are still here, so I guess we haven't bored you to death yet. And of course, a huge thank to our sponsors. We had a major influx of sponsors this year, including, I want to call out our sister projects at the Linux Foundation. For those of you who don't know, FINOS is part of the Linux Foundation. And today you're going to have a lot of content. There's something for everyone. We'll talk about it later in the agenda. But a huge thanks to our sponsors. Please don't forget to visit the sponsor showcase. I think it's right left here. And connect directly with our sponsors. Credit where credit's due. a huge thanks to our members. This is how we support the foundation. This year, we welcome 16 new members. I'm excited to see, we'll talk about it, how the foundation delivers, and open source delivers across the value chain of financial services, whether you're a vendor, financial institutions, buy-side, sell-side, and industry associations. So thank you. This wouldn't have been possible without you. So let's dive right in. We have a really packed agenda today, hopefully, as I said, an interesting one. We got 4 themes today. Open source is everywhere. The value of open source expands across all the constituents of the industry. The need for securing critical infrastructure like financial services and therefore open source supply chain. And of course, probably the 1,000 people are because we have AI in the title. So we're definitely going to touch on that. So let's get started. For those of you who don't know, all of our metrics are public. So if you go to metrics.finos.org, you can check our growth, you can check who's contributing, their affiliations, and I'm glad to report that as of last year, we have seen massive growth in adoption. Downloads are not the perfect measure of value and adoption. These are package managers, these are NPM data. But it certainly gives us a good trend of our projects and how useful and used they are in the industry. We've seen growth. FDC3 is exploding. It's our interoperability standard. You hear a lot about it today. 5x growth in the last year. Perspective is a real-time visualization library, 3x last year. But of course, our community would not be self-sustained, given that all of our contributions are voluntary, if we didn't have growth in contributions. And so I'm really happy to see over 2,000 contributors in our repositories and a steady growth, 60% year on year, of the amount of unique contributors that join our community. But this is not just about FINOS. Our mission is to grow open source in financial services. And so today we're announcing our 3rd edition of our State of Open Source in Financial Services report. You got your QR code there if you want to download it. It really gives you a snapshot of where the opportunities, the challenges, and the status of open source is across the industry, not just within our community. I'm going to bring our first panelist on stage, our first speaker on stage in a second, but I just want to give you sort of still a little bit of a thunder and give you a couple of key metrics. We talked about adoption and contribution. As far as adoption and consumption of open source, we have seen a steady progression over the last 3 years. As we started this survey in 2021, almost 3/4 of the organizations, of the interviewees, were not aware of even a policy for consumption in their organization. Last year, we kind of went up to half. This year, about 94% of the represented organizations said that they have policies that allow consumption. You'll hear it later. This year has been the last 2 years, we've seen massive rise of OSPO, open source program offices, as banks have structured themselves to participate in the open source. This industry has consumed open source software for the longest time. It's been a little bit less forthcoming when it comes to contribution, but I'm happy to report that, again, over the last 3 years, we have seen a steady growth from 2021. About half of the people had restrictive policies that would not even allow contributions. That almost doubled, sort of halved in 2022. And this year, only 5% of the organizations have policies that prohibit open source contribution. And this is what we're seeing firsthand in our community, where not only in FINOS, but really more and more financial institutions are contributing upstream in many projects in the Linux Foundation and beyond. Now, I stole a little bit of the thunder, but I want to bring up on stage Colin Eberhardt. He's the CTO of Scott Logic, one of our first contributors, and recently appointed as the chair of our technical oversight committee. Welcome, Colin.
Yep. Thank you very much. You haven't completely stole our thunder. There's more to come. To give you a little bit of a background, this is a collaborative project. The State of Open Source in Financial Services was a collaboration between GitHub, Linux Foundation Research, Red Hat, and Scott Logic. And a number of the people that worked on this report are in this room. So it's great to see some of you. And a big thank you to everyone involved. We launched the survey in summer 2023. I'm sure a number of you filled out the report and filled out the survey, and hopefully you'll do the same next year. We also interviewed a number of open source leaders within financial services, and this was to give some of the more human stories behind the data. There were some fascinating interviews that we undertook. And finally, as Gab mentioned, this is the third year running that we've actually undertaken this study. Now, you'll probably see, you've already seen some of these sort of mini bite-sized infographics that provide you with little kind of potted summaries of the data. These are fantastic tools to use in your own presentations with respect to open source. But what I want to do is just step back and give you the overall landscape and describe some of the things that we looked at with this research work. One of the things we looked at was GitHub activity. We wanted to track the actual activity of financial services organizations on GitHub, and we found for the third year running that the activity has increased. But also, there were some other interesting features. One of the things that I found really quite interesting is the most frequently used programming language within financial services for open source contributions is Python, which is quite surprising to me because I've worked in financial services for a number of years, and Python isn't the typical language associated with the day job. We also looked at the understanding of the value proposition. Now, open source is actually quite hard to understand. It's a complex environment, and I feel engineers sometimes struggle to explain their value proposition as well as business leaders. So this is an area that we wanted to explore. We also explored consumption and contribution, and Gab's already shared some of the key results that were emerging in the survey. And finally, leadership and opportunities. How effective is open source leadership in financial services, and what opportunities does it present? Now, the report itself is around about 50 pages long. There are lots and lots of figures, so I can't really show you all of the charts. So I thought, I'll pick my favorite chart. And I know you're probably looking at this and thinking, God, that's a boring looking chart. It doesn't even have colors. Well, I'm going to try and convince you that this is actually a very interesting report. I'm sure everyone in this room understands the importance of leadership with respect to open source. Again, to reiterate, it's not that easy to understand how to derive value from open source. So leadership and open source program offices are really important. And actually, in previous surveys, we were able to quantify the relationship between open source leadership, OSPOs, and some other metrics and factors within open source. For example, we found in the presence of OSPOs and open source leadership, there was much more permissive open source contribution and consumption policies. Even furthermore, we found that in the presence of leadership, the value that organizations derive from open source is increased. So I think this chart, which demonstrates within financial services a significant rise in OSPOs and open source leadership, is a fantastic result for financial services. So give yourselves a round of applause. So finally, if we take a little bit of a step back, I want to talk about some of the sort of high-level stories that we saw emerging amongst the data and among the interviews that we undertook. First, three years of steady improvement. We've already seen open source program offices, a steady improvement, contribution, consumption policies, again, steady year-on-year improvement. But other interesting ones were 78% of people indicated they are experiencing an increase in value from open source usage, which is up from 62% last year. Again, almost every important metric we look at is showing signs of improvement. And again, we've already seen that open source program offices are on the rise to the point that over 50% of respondents now work at an organization that has an open source program office. And again, contribution policies are becoming more permissive. Also, the industry recognizes the value of open source usage. Actually, through our interviews, one of the things that I found really interesting is talking to some of the people who are leaders in open source, they now have a very mature and a very healthy way of looking at how they consume open source. It goes far beyond compliance checks, security checks. The people that we talked to had a deep understanding of the community, the deep understanding of the project health when they were consuming open source projects, which is a fantastic result. Also, as Gab mentioned, contributions are becoming much more permissive. So now people work in organizations where it's much more likely that they will be able to give back to the open source community. Now, finally, the problems aren't all solved. It's definitely getting better year on year, but there are still challenges that we need to tackle. One of the things that I found really quite interesting, again, when talking to some of the people in a leadership position, is whilst open source contribution is permitted or encouraged, the mechanisms that people have to follow are a little bit challenging in a number of organizations. It's not unusual for people to have to use their personal GitHub account to be able to contribute back to projects that they're using on business time. Now, not only does this, to a certain extent, disincentivize the actual act of giving back, but also the organization itself loses out. They aren't able to point to the contributions that their organization are making back to the community. That's a problem, and that's one that I'd love to see solved. Finally, people indicated that SIG's Chatham House rules, getting small groups of people together in sort of safe environments, were a fantastic environment for solving some of these problems. And I know some of those are going to be going on around the conference. So finally, call to action. Download the report, read it. And if you're not going to read it, look at the pictures, at least. You know, they're good pictures. Actually, in all seriousness, this report is a tool. It's a tool that we created. It's a tool that you contributed to. And it's a tool that I think everyone should be using. It's a fantastic tool for showing the progress that we're making. And it's a fantastic tool for demonstrating the value of open source to financial services. So for me, that's very much my take-home message. Thank you very much. And back over to you, Gab.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you so much. And a huge thank to Colin, all the research partners, and the Linux Foundation Research, which is the arm of the Linux Foundation that really helps all of the projects to really deliver these insights. Hopefully you can enjoy the report. Now, as Colin said, the work is not done here. But today we're excited to announce, to have some really, hopefully, useful, actionable tools for you to grow your maturity in open source. For those of you who were here since the beginning, since I showed that picture, we've been working for the first few years of our existence to really enable financial institutions to become open source ready. We have a lively open source readiness group that at the beginning was really putting together best practices. And the beauty is that as firms have grown their OSPOs, as we've seen in the last 3 years, they have contributed back. And so over the last year, under the leadership of our senior technical architect Rob Moffat and our OSR SIG chair, Peter Smulowitz, we have built a comprehensive body of knowledge for open source readiness. Think about a set of best practices and a recipe as to how the largest financial institutions have become open source ready and are allowing their workforces to participate in open source in full open source compliance. And again, this is not FINOS. This comes from some of the largest members that have gone through a very specific financial services risk and compliance lens as to how to really enable tens of thousands of developers to work in open source through their own laptop. So I want to, first of all, send a huge shout out and thank you to the over 25 authors from some of the largest firms out there, some of the tech enablers that are part of our community. This wouldn't have been possible without you. And again, I think for those of you who are not yet open source ready, this is an amazing tool. Not only you can go to osr.finos.org and find all this body of knowledge, but today we are announcing, I think, 2 critical tools that hopefully can level up the whole industry. We want the whole industry to be able to collaborate in the open. First of all, we're announcing a free training for open source contribution in finance. Really, it's for every developer. It can be embedded in your learning management system. We truly hope, and we actually have 2 or 3 firms that already said they're going to make this part of their standard curriculum. Again, open source is just a part of your standard SDLC. So making this part of your technology workforce training, again, it's free, should be a way to truly accelerate your journey. Last but not least, we're also announcing a formal certification for a financial services open source developer. This is, again, based on the experience of years and years of firms working in this space. It's not only for financial institutions. Increasingly, I get asked which vendor, which consultant I can work with to help us in this journey. I'm not the kingmaker, so now there is a certification that everyone can take and prove yourself. And of course, there is a member benefit here. We are announcing the beta today, so you get the opportunity to take the certification for free, and in the meanwhile, help us to refine the exam. So hopefully, you can scan the QR code, you can go to the website. The Linux Foundation training booth is here in case you want to sign up for the beta or learn more about this training. And it is my pleasure now to bring in a good friend who's been here since the beginning across 3 different firms, is our governing board chair and the executive sponsor for the Open Source Readiness SIG. Can you come on stage, Rhyddian Olds?
Hi everyone. There's a lot of people here. It's great to see everybody. So as Gab was saying, open source readiness is very, very close to my heart. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why that was and how it's massively, massively accelerated our open source journey at Citi. I remember back in the very, very early days of FINOS, and at the very early days, Gab was like short trousers. It was very cute. I remember one of the board members then saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if somebody was to provide a redacted copy of their open source policy so that we could all benefit from that? And that person's in this room today, actually. So, because it was really, really tough, especially for those very early pioneers working with these conservative, risk-adverse, regulated industry companies to even contemplate thinking about open source and contributing to open source, like giving away our source code. Like, how would we do that? We're regulated. What about cross-border? What about electronic communications? All of these kind of blockers that stopped us doing these things. In the meantime, though, we were very enthusiastic users of open source. Heavily invested in using open source. So Linux, Kafka, MongoDB, React, Angular, like the list goes on. And I think 5 years ago, Red Hat estimated that something like 80% of the software that's running in our companies is open source. Now, if we think back to that list of open source that we use today, I think that's probably a bit of a low ball. It's probably nearer 90%. And so we're building our businesses, we're running our companies on open source, and yet we weren't able to contribute back to those communities. We are utterly dependent upon those, and this is the way that Citi sees this, is it's so important that we must participate in these communities. It's actually a risk not to participate, which is a different perspective that we took on it. We have to be able to participate in open source because our business depends on it. Now, the fundamental purpose of FINOS is to be the open source foundation for financial services. I don't know if there are many open source foundations that have to teach their members how to do open source. It's pretty cool. But this is why I'm the executive sponsor of the Open Source Readiness Group, because precisely that, it enables that mission. It's taught us how to work in open source and how to collaborate. In establishing the contribution policies and the Open Source Program Office at Citi, it helped us massively. It helped us set the scene at a very, very senior level as to why this was super important. Being able to say, hey, this is the gold standard, not just for how you do open source, but for how you do open source in financial services, and think about what the regulators require of us. Think about electronic communications, like how we're going to do that. It's been a massive accelerator for us. I can absolutely say we would not be where we are today in open source at Citi without open source readiness over the years that we've been going with it in FINOS. And as we've learned, we've been very fortunate to be able to contribute back to the body of knowledge. Do have a look at it. It is an amazing resource. The body of knowledge, the open source maturity model, everything to do with the tooling. We've been able to create tooling that we've contributed back to FINOS that we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So we were very lucky to help contribute back to it as well. Now, as I mentioned, the driver for Citi's engagement in open source is that logical conclusion of us being heavy consumers of open source. The risks of not doing it have been far too great. If we want to upskill our engineers and attract good talent, so think about cloud, like it's difficult to hire, right? It's expensive. They're difficult to get hold of. And so we can pay them a boatload of cash, which is what we're good at. But actually, we have to, because the talent is so rare. But ultimately, it's one thing to attract good talent, but if we want to retain them, they have to be able to contribute back to the communities that they're used to working in. So if we want to be able to retain good talent, if we want to upskill our own engineering talent, we have to let them work and participate in the open source communities that build the software that our businesses depend on. That's if we want them to stay anyway. We work very closely with the OpenSSF to bolster our approach to supply chain security. We're core contributors to the OWASP dependency track project. But supply chain security is more than just those tools and those approaches. It also involves ensuring that we have engineering talent that knows how to use and works with the communities that build that software. We have to look at things like community health, all of those other things, but we need the talent in our organizations working with those open source projects to help secure our supply chain. We have to be on the inside. Now, like many others, Gab's mentioned a few, there's a ton of really, really good projects within FINOS. We're heavy users of FDC3. We've got hundreds of applications that are live in production using it. We've contributed Git proxy, which is our data leakage prevention system, which enables developers to contribute to open source projects. There's a demo next door, well, all day next door. Paul Groves, who's in the auditorium now, is going to be demoing how Git proxy works. As I said, it's our way of controlling what leaves the bank in a regulatory compliant, policy compliant way. Fantastic tooling, and we're working on developing that. We've learned much more from the community that is built up around Git proxy since open sourcing it than we think that we contributed out to it. It's been a fantastic engagement. And as you probably heard, we led the groundbreaking Common Cloud Controls project, and we've seen an absolute eye-popping engagement level from across financial services and from across the companies and vendors and ISVs and CSPs that sit around that. It's been absolutely astonishing to see the level of engagement. We simply wouldn't have seen that a few years back. And this is where open source readiness has really brought us, the ability and the engagement and the willingness to work in the open for this greater good. And so this is really like the lesson that Citi has learned, that it's a business and technology imperative that we are active in open source, and that with the collaboration and diversity of thought that FINOS brings, as you'll see today across all of the projects and expos and talks, we can do some pretty powerful and amazing things when we work openly together. And that's the lesson that we've learned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rhyddian, for sharing your experience and for all your contributions to date. Well, actually, I don't know how many of you have heard about common cloud controls? Can I get a show of hands? Oh, okay. I guess this slide is useful then. A couple of weeks ago, actually, in early summer, we announced an initiative to harmonize cybersecurity controls and compliance for financial services cloud deployments. Jim Adams, the CTO for Citi and good friend of the foundation, brought it to FINOS. And since then, we've had over 25 firms joining, 130 folks contributing to it, clearly showing that this addresses an important problem in the industry. Last but not least, the White House has put out an RFI to request for comments on how we harmonize cybersecurity regulations. We responded yesterday. CCC took the lead to respond on behalf of FINOS. And look, as Rhyddian said, it's not always that we see so much early engagement on a project. There is indeed an open standard. But actually, as we work with other projects in the foundation, CFI is an acronym for Compliant Financial Infrastructure. We can really pair the definition of the spec through an open standard that is participated by regulated entities, cloud service providers like Google. We're going to hear about it later on. In really full accordance with the shared responsibility model, or as I've heard referred to it, shared fate model. So don't miss the executive keynote later. Hopefully you're not going to leave the room. We're not going to let you leave the room until the keynotes are finished. And then we have a breakout session that goes dives deeper into the technical details. Thanks again for bringing this amazing project to the foundation. Now, I want to switch gears to our second theme. This is not just about the big banks. After all, we are the FinTech Open Source Foundation. And so I want to hone in on the breadth of our community. We are now 79 members, as you can see, across the financial services value chain. Of course, sell side, increasingly buy side. We'll talk about it today a lot. Credit card companies, technology vendors, cloud service providers, increasing influx of fintechs this year. So why is that? Well, I want to be clear. Sure, there is an element of conscience that has brought me here. So giving back to the community is certainly why I started contributing to open source. But I wouldn't be here if I didn't contribute to open source. There was certainly a career aspect for me as an individual. And let's be clear, every company is in open source to drive their own strategic goals. Matt, famous open source sort of influencers, I would say, famous person in open source, say open source is selfish. I call it selfish altruism, because ultimately, it is a positive sum game. And that is clearly shown from our survey this year. 88% think that open source is good for their organization, but 90% thinks it's good for the industry at large. How do we see that playing out? Well, first and foremost, for individuals. I have to say, I love having 1,000 people here, or as many as you showed up. But the part that excites me the most of the community is when we bring young talent, diverse talent, folks that don't always get to sort of shine in a sort of in front of senior executive, in front of other firms across the firewall. And so one of the initiatives that our DEI SIG drove this year, it's called Big Boss Mondays. It just came to New York 2 days ago. It started in the UK. We have over 600 folks with financial institutions opening their doors to young and diverse talent that hopefully creates, not just talk, but truly allows folks not to hide behind the pipeline problem. Open source is truly a way of bringing in folks if we give them opportunities. Last but not least, and this is close to my heart, those who know me know that I have a special needs kid. Earlier this year, Discovered launched a global accessibility hackathon. We had, I think, over 200 people joining. It was an amazing experience. And again, this is pretty close to my heart. So I just want to show you this to say that, yes, it's about institutions, but it's also about individuals. You can work on your own profile in your own career. Don't miss our DEI lunch keynote panel. We got boxed lunch, so pick up your lunch and go to the panel. So we talked about banks, we talked about individuals. Startups are coming to the party. For those of you who have never seen this slide, I show it quite often. This is the flywheel of a sustainable open source community. It starts with projects. We have several projects that now are open source and create the basis for your products. This year, we've seen an influx of both M&A activity and VC funding on startups that have been created around our projects. And unsurprisingly, these smaller startups are seeing ROI and starting to join the foundation, hopefully flocking to the foundation. And our hope is that then they're going to contribute back because they have a strategic dependency into some of our projects. This is how we sustain our community besides, of course, our membership fees. Last but not least, the buy side is joining the party. This is something that we've been working on forever. I'm excited to say in the last year, we have 3 buy-side members joining us, and there's more on the way, going through a very short procurement process. And on this note, I would love to bring on stage Madeleine Dassule, is the CIO of Infrastructure Platform for Wellington Management, sits on our board and is our vice chair. Madeleine, you've been a champion. Please welcome on stage.
Thank you so much. It really is an honor to be on this stage in front of such an amazing community of technologists in financial services. It's a really impressive room, and when I came 2 years ago, it was a much smaller group. And I have to say, we're much better dressed this time around. So I don't know if that means we're getting more financial and less techy, but I would challenge everyone to think that maybe this is the conference where you can actually wear your t-shirts and not your dress shirts. So today's an opportunity for everyone to build connections, getting a community like this together. I've been in financial services for a very long time. I never thought I would see technologists come together in such a collaborative way across these firms. It just never seemed in the DNA of financial services. And it's just such an exciting change. So I want to take 30 seconds and ask each of you to turn to your left and right and actually introduce yourselves to the person that's sitting next to you. Okay, I'm going to be behind. Apparently we can do this all day. Okay, stop. Okay. Apparently we could just do this all day and forget about all the slides, Gab. I'm really glad to hear just the volume and energy in the room. It's really exciting, and thank you for that. So hopefully someone in this room found a mentor or a future colleague or a mentee, someone to share some code with. Just a reminder, FINOS runs lots of events that are about bringing the community together. There are meetups, there's the D&I stuff, there are these conferences. There was a hackathon that Kim Prado suggested last year that our Wellington technology team joined into, and it was the first time that we contributed code into open source through that hackathon. So very exciting milestone for us as a firm. We're a buy-side, we're a small firm. We have a much, much smaller technology footprint than our friends on the sell side do. So very exciting step forward. The team had a great time, learned from each other, got contributions and expertise from other firms through FINOS itself, and it was a super rewarding experience. So really excited for the community and really energized to use the code that comes out from it. So, and we got a prize, which I still think was rigged. Gab claims it wasn't rigged, but I'm pretty sure that, you know, there might have been some, we're trying to get the buy side into the community, and so we're gonna give them a prize involved, even though the code really was very exciting. And I will say, you know, when you just look at the arc of financial services, one of my goals is to get Gab to stop saying the banks when he's talking about financial services, because the financial services ecosystem is a much broader set of types of firms than just the banks. But the banks obviously have a giant technology footprint. So why open source, and why as a buy side would we be interested in participating in that way? I would say first and foremost, it's a proven playbook. We know from the tech industry that we can get higher quality code, that we can get a really dynamic, talented, energizing community of technologists who can have impact in their own firms, but also impact very broadly, and feel the reward that you get from that type of collaboration and contribution. But also, you look at the amount of, you know, money, if you will, that's being contributed, or costs that firms are crowdsourcing. It's a pretty extraordinary number in the technology industry. And, you know, financial services is extremely technology bound. So if we can do something similar and get our stats in financial services to look more like technology, we should be able to really change the game in material ways. So, cost mutualization and open source, and is it just about, are we just doing open source to save money? That's one of the questions that I think comes up. And, you know, to Rhyddian's point earlier, I think it's a larger thing for us as individuals and for careers. But it's also, in my mind, about the core good that comes from technology and from financial services. Our mission at Wellington is to maximize returns for our beneficiaries, millions of beneficiaries all around the world, right? So we're an asset management firm, and we manage people's 401ks, and we manage the pension funds, and we allocate capital to firms that are going to change the world. We allocated capital to some of the firms that were able to create the vaccine for COVID the fastest. And those firms were actually very technology driven, but they needed capital. So financial services was one of the things that gives people opportunity in society. And the cheaper that we can make it for people to engage in financial services, and the more we can retain for the end beneficiary, the better it is for everyone. So in my mind, yes, it's cost mutualization, but I see that as a cost mutualization for good in the broader sense, that if financial services operates really smoothly and collaboratively, the whole world benefits, and our beneficiaries absolutely benefit. So we're small. I laugh when I'm with my fellow board members and they say I have 10,000 developers, and we're like, we have 500 people in the entire technology department. So when it comes to things like common cloud controls, it's fantastic for us because we have historically leveraged the sell side enormously and other members of financial services, but we do it in a very bespoke one-on-one way. And being able to get people come together and engage and leverage the sell side more as a community that's working together on the same thing at the same time, and crowdsourcing and building on each other and amplifying is much, much more efficient for us, and it's much more efficient for the sell side, right? So having, you know, each sell side having a meeting with each buy side to talk about their cloud security individually is a giant matrix of meetings versus coming together and doing it together. So it's both energizing and exciting, and you get to leverage each other's skills and get to know each other, get some advice about your career and your technology, but it's also very, very much more efficient than it was to do this bespoke process. Let's see how many of these we have. So standards, APIs, security, there's a lot of things that we need to come together as a community in order to be able to do things faster and better. When I think about FINOS and sort of a buy-side point of view, one of the things that is most critical is interop. So if I look at my users, and I'm a big FDC3 sponsor, and Gab will give us some updates on FDC3 soon, but I see people in financial services who are looking at one screen, typing something in, looking at another screen, typing the same thing in over and over and over again. And that's just a poor use of human beings. And I think technology can do better and allow people to consume information and traverse these systems much more smoothly. But we need to do it in a way that's faster and more efficient. So it's very exciting to see FDC3 take off the way it does. It has. The other thing I'd say is I sit in rooms with fellow buy-side CTOs and CIOs, and inevitably everyone complains and moans that we're all working on the thing we have to work on versus on the thing that's really going to change the business proposition for the firm or your edge. And then we start talking about what those things are, and we end up realizing that we're all working on the same things. So, there's a difference between doing technology that's a common foundational platform that we need to have that needs to be safe and reliable and secure, and then doing technology that's differentiated for your particular business and firm. So moving that stack so the community gives us a really strong foundation that we share, and then some of our technologists can really work with the business on the edge. If we can move that line and move where the value stream is, it's going to make a huge difference for the industry and for individuals from a talent point of view. And then, again, the community, right? It's all about, at the end of the day, it's code, but the code's written by human beings, mostly so far. Very excited to have people come together and to see. And I will just point out that even in financial services, there's buy-side, sell-side. There's also custodians. There's a whole bunch of other people. And I will say the fintech coming to the table, the fintech community has been huge. And the more we can bring in solutions and integrate them using things like interop, I think we'll get the best solutions on the desktop for our users instead of the stickiest and the oldest and the hardest to integrate. So with that, I will hand it back to Gab, and thank you for having me on this stage today.
Thank you, Madeleine. Thank you so much. And I'm going to put a shameless plug. There will be a demo of an FDC3-based integration between Wellington and Morgan Stanley in just a few minutes, if I don't keep running long. So let me breeze through a couple of announcements on FDC3. For those of you who don't know, this is one of our core projects. It's an open standard for desktop interoperability, now becoming more and more a standard for industry-wide interoperability. It's been a busy year. We have so many firms adopting the standard at this point. I want to send a shout out to the project team and maintainers. They have just released the FDC3 2.1 version. You get your QR code to get there, to get involved. Special thanks to Madeleine and Dietmar Fauser, the CEO of Symphony, to be the executive sponsors as well. This is a standard that is growing fast. Talent and skills are in high demand. And so it's our role as an independent foundation, first of all, to make sure that if someone is claiming to be compliant with the standard, they are. We announced our conformance program last year. We have several vendors who are conforming. And today we're announcing OpenFin, one of the largest vendors in the space, being also certified for FDC3 2.0. So very excited to continue seeing the firms adopting, financial institutions, not just banks, but also vendors being very much engaged in the standard. And if you don't know what FDC3 is, or as I said, I keep sometimes looking on LinkedIn and finding skills, FDC3 skills being searched for. Earlier in the year, we launched an introductory course. It's free, again, embeddable in your LMS. And today, we're announcing an advanced development course for developers, for FDC3 developers. This is targeted, again, for financial institutions, application vendors, container vendors. It has, of course, some member benefits for our members. So hopefully, you might consider becoming a member of FINOS. And again, like the open source readiness training that we announced before, it's embeddable in your learning management systems. Last but not least, together with the training, we now have a companion certification. We're announcing the beta today, which it's free, so you should you're very welcome to start trying and helping us get into the level of quality that this industry needs. And once again, embed them in your learning management system, reach out to us or talk to training at the booth if you want to do that. Now, I'm going to breeze through the last two themes, so we're running a little bit over time. But, I mean, unsurprisingly, again, I talk a lot. Securing critical infrastructure, open source supply chain security. How many of you are familiar with the Log4Shell vulnerability? Okay, good amount, not enough, but last year that sort of brought to the table a big conversation around open source security and how we address sustainability more broadly of the open source dependencies that we all depend on. And this is not just a tech thing. The FTC said last year, don't blame the tech guy in the room. Board of directors, if you are delivering software with vulnerable open source components, it's your responsibility. So this is a C-level concern. Of course, the White House put out an RFI. So today I'm excited to have our sister foundation, OpenSSF, on stage, the Open Source Security Foundation. Rhyddian mentioned several of the firms in here are members of this foundation to really discuss what can we do as an industry to improve, again, our open source supply chain security, again, as part of our broader software supply chain security. And I'm also quite excited to bring on stage Robin Ginn, who's the executive director of OpenJS, our fellow Linux Foundation project. It's great to see across the world governments and if you're familiar with the German Sovereign Tech Fund, understanding that this is a critical issue that needs investments from the private sector and the public sector. Earlier in the year, OpenJS received an amazing grant from the German Sovereign Tech Fund. So I want to bring Robin to give us an interesting announcement here. Welcome, Robin.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. It is an honor to be here, and I also have several OpenJS friends raise your hand because we have a track this afternoon. So let's get started. The global web infrastructure is really in a precarious position based on new research. Today, most people use JavaScript, whether you know it or not. It's in 98% of the world's websites. So you might say that OpenJS is the front door, and FINOS is the, financial institution, right, behind our global economies. And so today we're announcing research that OpenJS did along with IDC, showing that 750 million websites are out of date, with most capturing financial and personal information. So PII is really at risk. IDC interviewed a survey with more than 500 people in 23 industries across North America, UK, and Europe. And these folks represented small, medium, and large organizations. And what's really was, alarming is that over 1/3 of the respondents reported having a security incident in the last 24 months. So let me share some of the findings. We surveyed these businesses through the lens of jQuery. jQuery is a 17-year-old JavaScript project hosted at the OpenJS Foundation, and it's still widely used today. So what we found is people did report 89% of these folks do know that they use jQuery on their internet-facing sites, which pretty much matches other organizations who index kind of the top 1 million websites in the world. So what we calculated is that jQuery is used in 1 billion websites today. Boy, this is being cranky. Okay. Come on. What else did we find? 80% captured PII, including payment information, 52%, location, 64%, and contact information. And as we all know, that the business damage from security is very critical. You see that the loss of customers, loss of revenue, but additionally, we found 39% reported regulatory violations and 45% reported brand damage. So obviously, better security is the #1 motivator for almost half of these folks. So really, we sat back and go, wow, that's a really big problem when 750 million websites are out of date. And it really led us to believe that more companies are using outdated and unsupported technologies, potentially putting consumers at risk. In fact, though, most of the folks that we did survey reported that jQuery was not the cause of their security incident. So what we thought is we see jQuery as sort of the canary in the coal mine. So while your outdated jQuery version may not be the cause of your security incident, it's probably likely a sign that your processes to patch and have safety policies are probably not there. And if you look back, jQuery really made web development accessible for everyone, and this sort of accessible approach is why many websites and website generators, so think about Bootstrap and WordPress, they all use jQuery. But it also has allowed those 750 million websites to stay on outdated and old versions. And we have an amazing group of volunteers on our jQuery core team. And they do release security fixes and update and new features. But unfortunately, the rest of the world is not making updates. And we found, gosh, the extent of the problem was even really hard to understand. And this is a brilliant group of developers, but we just didn't have the resources to take on this challenge. And so this is where the project Alpha Omega came in. And Alpha Omega is an affiliated project of OpenSSF. Their goal is to provide security for open source software. And they've been providing funding to OpenJS to work on not only this research survey, but many security and infrastructure updates, and then a modern health campaign. And if you look at Alpha Omega, what some of the projects they fund, usually they start with an audit, and then they do security fixes. But with OpenJS, we decided to take a different approach. Together, we thought, hey, let's try to better secure the consumer web. And let's work with public and private sectors and organizations to get folks to move off or upgrade their open source software. And if you think about it, ultimately, the responsibility for security does fall on the developer and the business owner, or as Gab says, or the CEO, the C-level. But keeping packages up to date, one, is great on security for sure, but it may not be a site's main security issue. And two, any version of jQuery, or really any package, can be abused or used in ways that open up security vulnerabilities. So wow, how do we solve a problem at this scale? So we thought, we need to start thinking about website security just like we do with healthcare. And so let's get everyone on board to start taking a regular assessment of their website security and start adopting good security practices. So as a result, the OpenJS Foundation is going to be creating a healthy web checkup tool. We're going to provide it to businesses and individuals worldwide. And it's really a way to sort of check your versions and to see if your website is using the most current versions of jQuery, and then we're looking to expand to other JavaScript projects critical to the web. This tool is currently in beta, and we're looking to GA in early 2024, and we're actively seeking partners, like if any of you all are interested, to help join us in this important effort. So if you're interested in getting involved, you can join our collaboration page. You can find out how to find us. You can come find me after the talk, come say hello. But I just wanted to sort of leave you with the message that you really should not let this constant noise about security in finance overwhelm you or give you a big scare, from Halloween. because we all are working across the industry and across the open source communities to help improve the consumer web. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Excuse me. I'll double dip here. Last but not least, thank you, Robin. I'm so glad, again, FINOS is part of the Linux Foundation. It's really amazing to see all of the projects working together to secure open source. Last but not least, as promised, open source AI, and this is just a tee up for the rest of the day. Again, one more show of hands. How many of you have seen the We Have No Moat paper? Very few. Okay, that's interesting. So of course, in the open source community, this resonated a lot. This is a leaked paper from Google that really talks about how open source is democratizing AI, and it's accelerating innovation. I'm not going to go into detail, but from the Llama 2 sort of, I wouldn't call it open sourcing, but opening or general availability, we have seen individual contributors accelerating the innovation on AI at a pace that actually, is comparable to what the hyperscalers are doing in OpenAI. So it's been a really great moment for us. It's a momentous time in technology through AI. And I gotta say that this industry was kind of right on the money. Over the last 3 years, we have seen consistently our survey identifying AI and ML as a very promising area for open source collaboration. So we're actively seeking, to learn today, come to our booth and talk to us, whether there is an opportunity to collaborate on a domain-specific financial LLM. In order to get your creative juices going and to keep you here, our closing keynotes are going to be all about AI. One end, we have Databricks giving us a keynote on, again, generative AI, openness, and financial transformation. And I'm also very excited to be hosting the head of AI research at JP Morgan, Manuela Veloso, for a fireside chat. So hopefully you stick around with the promise of some good closing content. Now, before I move to the next keynotes, this is a busy conference today. We have an amazing program. We have all sort of different tracks, hopefully something for everyone. But make sure you drop by also to our project expos, which really try to put our projects in the context of business usage, production usage of these projects. So learn the art of the possible. This is not just about technology. FINOS is about delivering ROI and business value to the whole industry. We have 8 projects demoing and showcasing their technology. And of course, you can build your own schedule. Last but not least, drinks and awards. So hopefully you stick around for the closing keynotes, for my favorite part of the community awards, and for the reception. Thank you so much.